Everybody ready? Good afternoon. I'm here to share a fire update and one that feels like some positive news on our statewide response efforts. I am joined on the phone by the Oregon Department of Forestry Fire Chief Doug Grafe, Oregon State Fire Marshal Mariana Ruiz-Temple, Oregon National Guard Adjutant General Michael Stencel, and the Oregon Office of Emergency Management Director Andrew Phelps. We're also joined by the Oregon Health Authority's Environmental Public Health Manager, Gabriella Goldfarb, who can answer any questions you might have regarding our current air quality. A little over 2 weeks ago, we faced unseasonably dry, windy, and hot weather conditions as we entered the Labor Day weekend. What developed in the days to follow was an all-encompassing fire event unlike Oregon has ever seen. More than 1 million acres of our beautiful land, trees, and homes burned. For days, our air quality was the worst in the world. We share a collective and deep sorrow over our losses, the loss of lives, the loss of our own homes or those of our fellow Oregonians, the loss of our forests and iconic landscapes. At times, it's felt overwhelming to have this crisis hit our state amidst what already feels like a difficult situation with COVID-19. However, today I'm here to share some good news. My teams tell me we've made significant progress on containing these fires, and with frontal winds that are bringing widespread moisture across the state, we are now entering a new phase of this fight. 3 of the big fires, Aubenchain, Bratton, and the 242 fire, are contained to the point that we are returning the fire response back to the local districts. This is really good news. That leaves 7 major fires: Riverside, Beachy Creek, Lion's Head, Holiday Farm, Archie Creek, and Slater. These fires range in containment from 13% to upwards of 38%. And that's giving our fire teams a lot of confidence that we've turned the corner. We've also seen FEMA aid start coming and following my request for a federal presidential disaster declaration. More than 4,250 individuals and families have applied for this assistance, with more than $7 million in aid approved. This will help Oregonians with their immediate critical needs, such as gasoline, groceries, diapers, and baby food. Director Phelps will talk more about how you can apply for this assistance and give you more information about it. Earlier this week, on Monday, I visited Southern Oregon, which was really hard hit by the Alameda fire. Seeing the losses and talent in Phoenix taught me that this is really a tale of 2 different types of fires. Ones that swept down the western-facing slopes of our passes, and the ones that, for seemingly no reason at all, burned a tragic path through our towns and cities. The path of destruction and talent in Phoenix felt really unexpected and arbitrary. These neighborhoods are filled with businesses, apartment complexes, homes, and mobile homes, and would, in my eyes, not have any particular reason to fear wildfire. And yet, an entire swath of land, homes, and businesses right along the I-5 corridor has quite literally been erased. It looks like a bomb went off there. I heard from the fire teams and our first responders that they managed to somehow save almost all of the lives. We unfortunately lost a few, and they were obviously instantly overwhelmed by these fires. The fires moved as fast as the fire teams could chase them, and with 11 fires raging across our state, they were understaffed and under-resourced to manage a fire of this intensity and with this rapid of a progression. And yet, they did exactly what needed to be done. They were focused, motivated, and their actions saved lives. These brave men and women stood up fire lines using all the trucks that they had to block the fire. They called in retirees and volunteers. As they said in their own words, they worked as one. One force, one team, one mission. People like Oregon State Trooper Cameron Wiggett. He couldn't stay away and voluntarily put in 50 hours of overtime on the Alameda fire, safely evacuating 2 children who were separated from their family and 2 adults with disabilities to a Red Cross site. His efforts also led to the arrest of a person suspected of arson in connection with the fires in Southern Oregon. Firefighters and troopers just kept going, knocking on doors, transporting people, and in some cases, literally rescuing people from burning homes. I was also inspired by our National Guardsmen and women, many of whom are students and themselves from these hard-hit communities. Some have had their own homes destroyed by fires, yet they still answered the call to help others. I know in the coming days, weeks, and months, we will unveil more stories of extraordinary Oregonians who have done heroic acts for our state during this crisis. I offer my gratitude to each and every Oregonian who put their lives on the line to save others. Thank you. As we pivot from the urgent nature of this disaster response toward recovery, I want to acknowledge as well that the coming days, weeks, and months will also be very challenging. I am here with you, and I will continue to fight for every tool and resource to help Oregonians rebuild. I'm putting together a team to lead our statewide economic recovery efforts and bring together federal, state, and local resources to support Oregon's communities moving forward. This Wildfire Economic Recovery Council will be co-chaired by Treasurer Tobias Reed and Bureau of Labor Commissioner Val Hoyle. Local legislators, along with community members and business representatives, will join them on the council. Members of my regional solutions team with expertise in specific areas hit by these fires will help identify and elevate specific county issues that need resolution and support. It's going to be a long road ahead. I don't want to sugarcoat that. But we're putting our best and brightest at it and bringing all the resources we have to bear. In the very early days of these fires, we expected incredible losses, and we had them. But fortunately, the loss of life has been much less than we expected. The mobile morgue that the Oregon Police set up has been demobilized. The urban search and rescue teams that FEMA sent in have also been demobilized. The fact that more people did not lose their lives during this incredible fire event is a testament to the heroic efforts of federal, state, and local first responders, many of them volunteers, and also to the neighbors who checked on one another and helped their neighbors evacuate. To the many unknown heroes who helped your friends and neighbors escape the path of fire with their lives, we all honor you and we thank you. Wildfire completely alters a landscape, and Oregon and all of us who call this place home have been absolutely changed by this experience. But after a wildfire, eventually new growth begins to take root on the forest floor. Some types of trees actually come back stronger after fire. And that's exactly what Oregon is going to do: rebuild and regrow even stronger. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Fire Chief, Doug Grafe.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Governor Brown. Today I'll speak a little bit to what we're looking at in the next 72 hours relative to weather conditions. I'll speak to current fire status with a bit more specificity across the landscape on the 10 large fires. And Governor Brown, you'd be pleased to hear I just connected with incident management teams before this call, and I'll be able to bump up those containment a little bit more for folks today. And I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about containment and the turn back to the district and speak to really what that means to take some of the mystery out of the fire terms we use and I've been hearing over the past several weeks. I'll close with answering a few of the most frequent questions that are coming into our office lately, and that's relative to fire stats and power lines, and then what's the cost of this fire season. I'll close with those 2 points. So to begin, as the governor highlighted, really good conditions come our way relative to rains over the next 72 hours, and that's only going to be helpful for us to hold these lines and continue to improve these control lines and up the containment and confidence in holding these lines across the state, specifically west of the Cascades. It's looking like most of the rain will be falling there. That's really where we need it. And, upwards of 2 inches possibly on the Riverside and Beachy and Lions Head fires. And that's exactly where we need some support from that moisture. It's not aggressively rolling over the crest of the Cascades, unfortunately. But the majority of it on the west side is in the range to 1 inch to 2 inches over the next 72 hours. It's not going to be as aggressive as we would like to see in the southern third of Oregon relative to rain accumulations, but we will see cooler temperatures and an increase in relative humidity. So specifically, the Slater fire has limited rain, what we're expecting on that over the next 72 hours. Relative to fire status, the governor's absolutely right. There's a number of fires that we're able to turn back to the districts. And the containment on these fires, the Bratton fire out of Paisley, is 87% contained. 242 fire, 95% contained. That's out of Chiloquin. And then South Obenchain fire, 80% contained out of Medford. The containment on these fires is an expression of how confident we are that these fires will remain within their control lines. So that containment rises every day as we exercise resources, dig lines, and reestablish reinforced control lines. So that confidence goes up. When that confidence is up to those levels, as the governor highlighted, we're able to turn those back to the local district, who has the ability to set up some crews and engines to just put that fire into patrol status. Our job from here forward when we turn it back to the district is to make sure it stays within those control lines. So the local folks are going to be patrolling those lines, but it will not take the amount of resources that we have on them now to control those lines. So really positive, and those 3 fires are turning back to the district this week. The Thielsen fire sits at 9,000, close to 10,000, 26%, and that's up at Crater Lake. I expect that fire to be around a little bit. It's tougher country. It's this high country that we've got to push crews into, take some more time to bump up that containment and confidence that we're going to hold it. But this weather is going to be really helpful for that fire, and frankly, I don't expect it to move on us too much. So that leaves us with, as the governor highlighted, 7 large fires left on the landscape. And I've heard the term, and I think we've all heard this as mega fires, fires over 100,000 acres each on the landscape. And these ones we expect to be with us until the heavy rain, consistently fall. And that typically comes in mid-October for us. We would hope, obviously, we can get that sooner, but that's sort of where it sits right now. No indication after this rain event that there's systematic and consistent rainfall coming after this. So I suspect through mid-October, these mega fires will be on the landscape, and I'll speak to each one of these. The one I'm most concerned about right now, given the weather conditions and not getting the rain, is the Slater fire. This sits at 150,000 acres. Good containment at 24%, so we're building that confidence that we're going to hold those lines. However, not going to get much rain. So that's going to be our one to really watch, and we're going to make sure we have the resources and hold those lines where we have them. Moving north to Archie Creek fire, 131,000 acres, 52% contained. So, Governor, that's one, just speaking with managers this midday, gaining a lot of confidence. We're going to get moisture on this fire, so feeling a lot of confidence there moving forward. Holiday Farm fire, 170,000 acres, 27% contained. The Beachy Creek fire at 192,000 acres, 46% contained. So these are recent numbers given last night's work, given the cooler temperatures at night, the shorter days. We're going to see that confidence and that containment level continue to rise. So really excited about these numbers. Lion's Head, 203,000 acres at 15% containment, and that's a reflection that much of that fire sits on the east side, the crest of the Cascades, and it's been in that drier climate in the warm springs. So we'd like to see more rain on that east side. We're hoping for that. We'll see what happens over the next 72 hours, and that would certainly help bumping up that confidence that we're going to hold it within those control lines. Riverside bumped up today to 31% containment, and that's 138,000 acres. It's hard for me to articulate and understand what we have on the landscape with these six fires over 100,000 acres across the landscape. The amount of work that we have collectively done as Oregonians and all the help that has come across the nation is profound. We're talking well over 1,000 miles of control lines established across these fires. I can't thank enough all the coordinated effort. In particular, I would just highlight, we can't do this work without, the Oregonians, the landowners, range landowners who provide the equipment that we need to establish these control lines, the contractors. I've got 340 pieces of private equipment that are bring to bear to help control these lines, 160 contract crews, and 58 aviation assets in hand available to support control lines, and they have been doing an outstanding job working with all other volunteers and cooperators. I'll close today with the frequent questions. So there's been a lot of questions coming into the office relative to what started the fires and are they power line related. So there have been firsthand accounts of fires being started by downed or damaged power lines that have been noted in the media and come into our office, including our own fire teams that battled fires in Gates on September 7th that started when trees downed power lines in our own fire camp and ultimately ran us out of fire camp. With that said, an official origin and cause must be determined by trained investigators conducting an official fire investigation. The Oregon Department of Forestry, Office of State Fire Marshal, and our federal wildland fire partners are currently engaged in official investigations to determine origin and cause from all the September 7th fires, and frankly, that's our charge by the legislature to determine origin and cause on all fires on our jurisdictions. This is an interagency coordination effort. It's typical when fires burn across multiple jurisdictions as we have in this environment. Once origin and cause are officially determined, we establish responsible party and liability under the advisement of the Department of Justice. We understand how important this information is to the public, and we will share official investigation status updates when we can. The second question that's come into our office frequently is the cost of fire season to date, and are we going to initiate the Lloyd's of London insurance policy? ODF protects approximately 16 million acres of private and public forest land and grazing land. For fire season 2020, we're estimating gross suppression costs on ODF protected lands at approximately $78 million at this time. weather conditions will absolutely be the driver for what we ultimately spend on suppression to hold these fires in their current control lines. So projecting out to mid-October, where we would hope to see a season-ending event, we could see costs upwards of over $100 million in large fire suppression costs. FEMA has been an outstanding partner. We're expecting over $50 million in recoveries, which leaves the state at approximately $50 million in net costs to the state, which is a trigger point to initiate a claim with our Lloyd's of London insurance policy. So as a result, we just recently notified Lloyd's of London of a possible claim. We do not know if we'll have a claim at this time until the end of fire season, but we have notified them of a possible claim. I'd close today with another request to keep those private drones out of the fire areas. If you fly, we cannot. And we've had to ground aircraft this week on both the Riverside and Beachy Creek fires due to drones flying within our temporary flight restrictions over these fires. So please advise, if you fly, we cannot. End of report, Governor.
Thank you, Chief Grafe. Fire Marshal Mariana Ruiz Temple, do you have an update for us today?
Yes, thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. I am happy to report right after Chief Grafe on the work of all of the fires that were currently on the landscape. Just to remind everyone that the Office of State Fire Marshal was involved in 11 conflagrations. Again, this is one of the largest in terms of one fire season to date. I'm also happy to announce that we have demobilized off 10 of those, and we remain on Slater, our only conflagration at this time. Based on Chief Grafe's weather report, we do expect that we'll stay under unified command with that incident management team through the week, with an eye on the weather that we know will be coming in this evening in terms of precipitation and possible winds. But then we expect to see increased temperatures over the weekend, and so we'll continue to have resources there as they reach containment and to a better place in terms of the protection of our structures. All indications on that fire at this time seem to be good, and we have not lost structures. Our focus at the Office of State Fire Marshal really is now on resetting our Oregon Fire Mutual Aid System, which essentially is the Oregon Fire Service. To date, the remaining resources on the Slater fire are out-of-state resources from Utah, Idaho, North Dakota, and Minnesota, and Washington. And we're in a good place in terms of the resources available to the state should we see new fires start. We are also working with the fire service departments and agencies that have experienced loss in terms of direct loss, like we saw to the Upper McKenzie, Jackson County 5, and Detroit, in terms of helping set them up for success, either working with FEMA or helping to support them from a resource availability standpoint. And then we stand by to serve any other needs that come up in the future, and assisting, as Chief Grafe said, on these origin and cause task forces. Thank you. End of report.
Thank you. Next up, Adjutant General Mike Stencel, Oregon National Guard.
Thank you, Governor. As you mentioned earlier, Guard participation is down dramatically from last week. From a high of about 1,300 Guardsmen, we now have 546 still on status, and we continue to see that decline heavily throughout the week. Starting off with traffic control points, or TCPs, those continue to decline as well. From a high of about 54, we're now down to 15 traffic control points, primarily to the release of traffic control points in Jackson, Lincoln, and Lake counties. On the aviation front, with the return of our Black Hawks from the Bratton fire, all of our aircraft have returned back to Salem, but we are keeping one Black Hawk on medevac standby, expected to last to the end of the month in support of ODF on the ongoing fire response. Lastly, with regard to ground firefighting support, two of our teams have come off status. The first one came off Archie Creek fire on Monday. The second one came off the 242 fire in Klamath Falls just yesterday. And we're hopeful that the Holiday Farm fire team will be coming off next Monday. The two teams that we had in training down at Camp Rylea, both were fortunately able to complete their training before they were released. And as noted with the commissioners this morning, we're fortunate to have the support from Senator Merkley and get all those folks trained on federal dollars at no cost to the state. And those will be accessible for next summer in the event that they're needed. And then our fatality search and recovery team that we had down there in Albany, all 12 of those members have come off mission today. And that concludes my update, Governor, but I just want to add one more thank you again to all the families, school employees, civilian jobs employers that have been standing behind these guardsmen throughout this effort. We've seen a lot of these folks undergoing their own stress, coming on and volunteering even while their families or extended family members have had to evacuate, and they still stood tall and been out there to help everybody. And they couldn't have done it without the backing of the families, schools, and employers. So thank you.
Thank you, General Stencel. Director Phelps, Office of Emergency Management.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Governor. Thanks to our media partners for continuing to help get some really important information out to the public who've been so impacted by these fires statewide. I also want to continue just to offer the gratitude to those firefighters, our responders that are still out in the field protecting Oregonians. Chief Grafe mentioned the firefighters that have come in from all across the country, and I need to acknowledge our emergency managers who've been working around the clock for the last 2 weeks to coordinate response, provide information, and lay the groundwork for recovery have also been supported by emergency management personnel, additional response resources from 47 other states. That's an incredible number. I don't know that I can recall a disaster in our nation's history that has seen a response equal to that. It's incredibly impressive. And just as Oregonians come together to support each other, it's nice to know we've got the support of our state partners in our time of need. I also want to note we've seen disasters across Oregon in the past: floods, other fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, winter storms, but we've never experienced anything like this. And as we're going to pull together as a state, it's just critically important that Oregonians know we've got the strength of the nation behind us as well. Governor Brown mentioned the 4,200 folks that have applied for FEMA assistance. $7 million has already been approved, and more than half of those funds are already in the bank accounts of Oregonians who've been impacted by this disaster. That helps to initiate recovery and ensure those folks have what they need to take care of themselves and their families in the immediate aftermath of this disaster. The American Red Cross and the Oregon Department of Human Services continue widespread mass care operations. We have over 73 hotels and motels engaged in providing over 1,100 rooms for 2,200 Oregonians to have a safe place to stay at night. I want to emphasize hotel and motel rooms are an important part of our ongoing mass care strategy, but it's a temporary solution. We'll continue to partner with the Red Cross, our federal partners, and our state partners in support of local government to ensure Oregonians who have been displaced by this disaster have a safe place. We've been able to engage with our federal partners and the Oregon Disaster Housing Task Force to conduct an environmental scan of available housing in these disaster-impacted areas. And we know most of our communities that have been impacted have a 2 to 3% vacancy rate. The Housing Task Force, which has been meeting to coordinate disaster response and planning initiatives since 2012, will continue to work on identifying temporary housing solutions to protect those who have been displaced until more permanent housing can be established. We've lost a lot in these disasters, but we continue to prioritize safety. To date, the number of Oregonians who've lost their lives due to these fires stands at 9, as confirmed by the state medical examiner, and law enforcement still has 5 individuals that have been reported as missing or unaccounted for. important to me as the state's emergency management director and our entire Oregon emergency response system to ensure the safety of all Oregonians as we continue to respond to fires and initiate recovery. We've established the Oregon Debris Management Task Force at the state level to support local efforts to get folks back to a situation where permanent housing can be established. This task force consists of the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, Oregon Department of Transportation, the Department of Environmental Quality, and federal partners like FEMA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. This task force is guided to ensure the right people have the right access to resources to help individuals, the families, and the communities that have been impacted by these fires. We'll continue to partner with counties because they know what is needed in their communities. The goal of this task force is to ensure state resources can be leveraged and that we maximize federal investment in our recovery. I know Oregonians are anxious to pitch in and get to work. It's what we do when we have bad days. But we need to be safe and deliberate about how we clear things like hazardous materials that are being found on our private property and home sites that have been impacted by fires. Things like propane tanks, air quality issues, paint, household cleaners, those all pose a threat to these home sites that have been lost due to the fire. An immediate threat to health and safety as well as long-term health impacts. We also need to ensure that the infrastructure exists to support Oregonians as they begin to return home. This includes water and wastewater infrastructure, energy and other utilities, communication services, and perhaps most importantly, emergency management and response services. We don't want folks returning to communities if we can't provide basic law enforcement, fire, and EMS support to those communities. I want to close by reminding Oregonians to continue to apply for FEMA assistance through individual assistance websites. We've heard reports that Oregonians who have applied have received notices that they've been denied or deemed ineligible for FEMA assistance. When you receive those denials or those ineligibility notices, it will have information about the appeal process. If you receive a denial, please follow the appeal process. Very often, folks are deemed ineligible because they missed a signature someplace or had an incorrect date. It's critical that Oregonians continue to follow the process and receive every bit of federal assistance that's available. It can be frustrating. I get it. But when we bring FEMA in to help us respond and recover, there are processes in place. And I just can't say enough about how important it is that we stick with it. We want to get resources out to the communities via our multi-agency resource centers to continue to guide folks through that process and ensure every bit of funding that's eligible for Oregonians to get them back on their feet is being taken advantage of. That concludes my prepared remarks, and I'll turn it back over to you, Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Phelps. I think we're ready for questions at this point in time.
Thanks, Governor. Looks like we just have a few people on the line to ask questions today. For the reporters listening, please go ahead and press 0 to ask a question. We'll start out with Dan Tilkin with Coin 6.
Hello, Governor. Thank you. The Beachy Creek fire started back on August 16th, so it's been burning several weeks before the major wind event. We have heard from several people who the fire could have been put out when it was 5 to 10 acres before the major wind event was allowed to burn. And then we're told it became too dangerous for crews to battle it with the high winds. Can you please comment on this? What resources were put on this fire ahead of the wind? Was there anything that could have been done differently?
Thank you, Dan. And I will let Chief Grafe speak to specifics, but I will tell you from my perspective, particularly following the Chetco Bar fire down on the southern Oregon coast, when we had an early burning fire that exploded 4 weeks later. We have been working very hard with our federal partners to make sure that we are putting these fires out so they don't cause problems down the road. My understanding of the Beachy Creek fire is that in working with our federal partners, folks worked extremely hard under very difficult circumstances to contain the fire and put it out, from bringing in hotshot crews who said that the terrain was too steep, to the challenge with flame retardant because it was in a wilderness area. So I think there were extensive efforts. I think the conditions were extremely challenging. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Grafe.
Governor Brown, I think that's a fair assessment. The only thing I might add, other additional assets that I understand were brought to bear in the early days is repellers were pulled in to see if they could land safely into that deep, decadent, old-growth, heavy timber, and that was deemed unsafe. And then smoke jumpers also looked at getting in there and were unable to do that. I know the U.S. Forest Service did hike in on several occasions, the hot shots, as the governor mentioned, to assess the situation, and given the extremely steep terrain, had difficulty, finding safe places to engage in that fire. So the strategy was to check it as best they could relative to the growth with aircraft as the safest operational pathway. And I understand that's where they put their energy for the most part. But officially, I think, the Forest Service is the right place to ask that question and understand the posture on their strategies.
If I could ask a follow-up question, do you know how much old-growth timber forest has been lost?
Doug Grafe here. I do not know at this point. We're tracking closely overall data points, of course, the numbers of acres, and we're well over about 1.1 million acres burned to date. In this weather event, well over 970,000 acres. We're approaching 1 million acres just in this weather event itself. On ODF protected lands, we have never experienced this amount of burned acres. We're sitting at 534,000 acres on ODF protected lands. The other lands would be, there's a lot of Forest Service that makes up the other 500,000 acres out there. BLM, the Warm Springs, and then of course we've got some range fires on private lands, etc. Specific to how much old growth is there, I wouldn't have that at this time.
Next up, we have Aaron Ross with OPB. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hi there. I was curious about the ongoing efforts to clear some of the highways over the Cascades, and if there's any sort of timeline for that with the debris falls, and then if debris falls are expected to continue once the highway is clear, or if we should expect additional closures come winter.
Director Phelps, Chief Grafe, does either one of you want to take that question? And I only caught a part of it, so Aaron, we may need some help here.
Hey, Governor.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
This is Andrew Phelps, Oregon OEM. I'll take the initial stab at this. I do know that ODOT is actively working to clear the highways that have been impacted by downed trees and the fire-related debris, but I also know that there's still significant safety and access issues with utility lines and fire in the area. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Grafe for any additional.
Director Phelps, that's accurate. Primary in the mission and our focus is open up the main arteries, the highways. Then we'll look at tertiary roads, and the incident management teams in place coordinating with ODOT and ODOT's contractors to help expand that access. The risk remains. Trees that have been damaged and weakened from fire in the root system continue to fall, and it is dangerous. So we're clearing deep off of those highways and off the tertiary road systems. So encourage people to be cognizant of the depth of fire and intensity in the area, and be suspect, if you will, of trees in and around structures, and ask for professional assistance relative to identifying those hazards as we move there. Overall, we're pushing hard to open up as much of the areas we can, and there's a lot of ground to cover. Thank you.
So for the second half, since I think that was missed, given the damage to the hillsides and slopes surrounding these highways, should we expect additional road closures come winter due to debris fall?
Doug Grafe here, and I can speak to beginnings of this. We did hear a report from ODOT. It certainly is a concern. Debris flow is absolutely a possibility. Once we take and remove the fire-burned canopy off that landscape, there's higher risk for flow because of the damaged trees and root systems. So we're certainly watching for that. There'll be areas where it's more likely in steep draws, and certainly we'll be watching for that. But debris flows are certainly a potential coming out of these fire-burned areas.
Aaron,
This is Andrew Phelps.
Go ahead, Director Phelps.
Thank you, Governor. I just to flip stomp and emphasize that point there. We certainly would expect, just like we saw in Eagle Creek with Interstate 84, the challenges of fires burning on those steep hillsides adjacent to roads. But I want to be cognizant of the fact that you could live downriver, downstream from some of these burned areas, and that will also increase the flash flood risk. So if you live, work, travel adjacent to water, and I think all Oregonians probably do, make sure that you're staying in tune with the National Weather Service on rain warnings, flood warnings and watches, and that you kind of have that lens as you're planning trips, if you're traveling around, and if you certainly live near waterways. The threat in a lot of our communities is going to be significant due to increased flows in our rivers, especially after rainstorms.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Next up, we have Gary Warner with EO Media. Go ahead, Gary.
Yes, hi, Governor. We kind of had a disaster on top of a pandemic during the fires. There was problems with testing and the accuracy of numbers that the state was reporting. We're seeing nationwide a spike in COVID-19 cases, 13% increase according to the New York Times, including a 19% increase in Oregon over the 14-day rolling period. Do you feel like the state has a handle on what's going on with COVID, and how would you assess the current COVID situation in Oregon?
Thank you, Gary. I don't know where we stand nationally, but Oregon, because of the tremendous sacrifices of folks across the state, has remained one of those states with the lowest infection rates. However, we are being challenged by a couple of things right now, as you mentioned. I don't think we've ever had a global pandemic with a historic wildfire season. And I think it is fair to say that given the challenges that a number of Oregon families faced, from the Santiam Canyon to Talent and Phoenix in Southern Oregon to Lincoln City, that many of us are seeking shelter with family and friends, couch surfing, living under very challenging living circumstances. And given the rapidity of the fire growth, had to leave under very challenging circumstances. So we are not surprised to see an increase in COVID cases in Oregon right now. You will also note that we are roughly 2.5 weeks beyond a Labor Day weekend. And we have seen in the past, whether it was Mother's Day or 4th of July, that case counts have gone up following holidays, because we all want to celebrate with our family and friends. And I think when we are with people that we know and love, we let our guard down. We are less likely to wear masks. We are less likely to watch our physical distances, and we are less likely to, I hope not less likely to do our personal hygiene, washing our hands. But that's the reality of the situation. So we are watching the numbers very closely, obviously concerned. And I just want to take the opportunity to call upon Oregonians to double down on your efforts to protect yourself, protect your family members, protect your community members. It is going to get more challenging as we move into the fall weather, and likely see more rain, and we're going to be stuck indoors. The other challenge we have, I know from looking at hiking options in the region, substantially limited because of the impacts of fire on a number of our forests and parks. So that's why at the state level we're working really hard to step up our efforts and make sure we're connecting the dots around contact tracing, quarantine and isolation services for people who have been impacted by COVID, as well as making sure that we are providing wraparound services. I do know that testing numbers decreased during the last couple of weeks. I think it's understandable when people are fleeing for their lives that probably the global pandemic is the last things on their mind. But obviously we're going to continue to ramp up testing efforts and get it to those communities that need it the most, and make sure that we're doing a full throttled effort around all of these efforts to contain the spread of the virus.
Thank you for that answer.
Thanks, Gary. Last question we have today is from Dick Hughes. Go ahead, Dick.
Thank you very much for doing this. Governor, following up on Gary's question, we have the collision of several things going on, the wildfires, the pandemic, and yet a very upbeat economic and revenue forecast today, at least for the current biennium. Does this change your perception of when a special session would be needed, whether the vetoes that you made recently to preserve money were necessary, and what the state's outlook will be going forward for its budget, given that we don't know all of the fire costs yet?
So, in short, Dick, you asked a lot of questions in that. I'll try and respond to most of them. First of all, our revenue forecast is up both for this biennium and next biennium. And to that, I can say hallelujah. We needed some good news. And I think our hope in an additional COVID relief package at the federal level is waning, at least mine is. In terms of my vetoes for the last special session, I'm honestly still glad that I vetoed the reduction in budgets for the agencies that are responding to our wildfire needs, from the military department, our National Guard, to the Oregon State Police, to the Department of Forestry. I'm incredibly grateful for the collaborative efforts that these agencies have stood up to not only save lives, but to help support Oregonians. There is roughly $200 million in the E-Fund for the E-Board to spend over the next few weeks. I expect them to be very careful about how they spend those resources. There are thousands of Oregonians in need. Unfortunately, these fires impacted those who are living on the economic edge the worst. Just like we saw with the COVID, with the global pandemic, our historically underserved communities have been impacted the hardest by these wildfires. And my heart goes out to these families with the challenges that they face. We have a couple of primary missions, including debris removal, both hazardous and non-hazardous waste, but we also are going to have housing needs, both on top of a housing crisis. Now we have a wildfire housing crisis on top of our housing crisis. So I hope to work collaboratively with legislative leadership and members of the legislature to make targeted investments to support these families over the next few weeks. And then I expect, following the election, that we will see a special session to tackle these needs as well as the other issues that have been on our plate. I don't anticipate it before the election.
Thank you very much for your answers to my verbose questions. I appreciate it. Thank you to everyone, to you and everyone else, for all that you've been doing in this regard.
Thank you, Dick. With that, I again will say thank you to our first responders, our law enforcement, our volunteers across the state who are spending so much time and energy to help their fellow Oregonians. We are incredibly grateful. We're also incredibly grateful for the media and helping us get messages out so that Oregonians can continue to remain safe. Thank you all, and be safe out there.